called The Thrill of Living. It was the greatest song he'd ever heard. For 4 minutes and 16 seconds, he sat on the end of a couch, staring at the stereo system, watching the vinyl turn, and hearing none of the party chatter as he focused on that perfect song. Granted, Jamie Conroy was only 12 years old the night of that party in 1982. Later, years later, he wouldn't remember much of the detail about that night other than hearing the song for the first time. He wouldn't remember who he went with nor how he got home. He wasn't supposed to be there anyway. It was a high school party and clearly he did not belong. As the song faded, Jamie stood up and crossed over to the turntable. He stared down on the label of the spinning record and noticed the artist and the name of the album, American Fool by John Mellencamp. He had apparently dropped the cougar from his name. At least that's how Jamie remembered it. He'd save his money to buy it. He'd learned to love a number of Mellencamp songs, but most of them wouldn't be on that album. There were a few others he liked okay, but none like Jack and Diane. He'd wear out that ring of the album once he had his own copy. It was that very night, that very moment as the song died away, that he decided he was going to go by the name Jack from now on. All right. Scene break. There's going to be a lot of scene breaks, so I'm not going to say that every time. I guess I have to because you got to know what's going on. So, scene break. Jack was doing his best to not let it seem like he was listening in on his parents arguing. He had MTV on and had it turned up to a respectable volume. His parents mostly thought he could hear nothing when that junk was on, so it made for a good cover. Dad had lost his job that very day. His mother was scared, and that just seemed to make Dad angrier. Jack felt sorry for him, but he was scared too. They were already talking about canceling plans for later in the summer. Dad would just be home with nothing to do but stew over the loss and take it out on Jack. The summer might be over for all of them. He focused on the video for Jack and Diane, playing across the screen in mostly still images. He hated to think that this memory might be attached to this song now. Jack still loved the tune. Even though he owned the record, there was something special about catching it on TV. By the summer of 1984, he had found other music he liked. The Purple Rain album had just come out last week. Like Jack and Diane, he had sat mesmerized through the whole thing. Unlike American Fool, the entire Prince album was amazing. He had busted open his piggy bank that day and bought the album with change. Still, this song meant a lot to him, and it broke his heart to hear his parents arguing and to not know what their future held in that moment. The argument outlasted the music video. The kid on the ground tried to get up again, but Jack, being bigger at 15 years old, planted his shoes square on the base of the kid's spine where it met his tailbone. He dug his heel in and really pushed the boy back down flat in the dust. Jack had read about this move in some pulp paperback novel somewhere. He wasn't sure it would work, but apparently the author had done his share of bullying or getting his face smeared in the dirt himself. Jack's friends laughed in a way that made them sound ogreish and stupid. He lifted his foot away from the kid and took a step back. The other boys went on laughing, and the kid stayed on his face. Jack and his friends had apparently broken the boy's will. There had been a reason for all this, maybe not a good one, but the kid had done something to draw their attention. Jack couldn't remember what it was just then. His brain finally clicked over and recognized what he was hearing in the distance. Jack turned as the others started sliding the soles of their shoes through the dirt to kick it up into the boy's face and on his clothes. The dust swirled into a storm that stung Jack's nose. He spotted the car in the distance. It was maybe 20 years old, but well cared for and shined in the sun. An older boy and girl leaned together on the side of that old Mellencamp tune played through the air from their radio. If they saw what was going down or had an opinion about it, they didn't show it. They were caught up in each other. Jack found himself wishing he had a girl of his own to lean with around the time that song came out, a girl that he could say about this song that it was theirs. He found himself wishing he was anywhere but here, maybe anyone besides himself. The goonish, stupid laughter. It was the way his dad's friends laughed after drinking too much. They were all the kind of mean that Jack was being now. He didn't trust them, he didn't like his dad around them, and was growing to hate himself more and more by the moment. He turned just as the other boys started really kicking the kid on the ground. Jack stepped forward and tried to push his friends aside, but they kept at it. He shoved harder and got their attention as a couple of them nearly went off balance. He took the moment of confusion to pull the kid up and manhandle him away from the others. Dirt shed off of the boy's clothes in many landslides. The kid coughed, gagged, and wept. Jack hated the little boy for his weakness and hated himself even more. Go. He shoved the kid forward a few steps, but the boy stopped, with his head hung and shoulders slumped. As dirt dribbled out of the kid's messy hair, Jack realized the kid thought this was some kind of trick. The others started to move, and Jack decided he had no time left. He kicked the boy in the butt, and before he could fall again, Jack took him by the collar and forced him back upright. I said go. Get the hell out of here before I really do start kicking your ass. Go. The kid broke into a run as the paralysis finally let up. The others chuckled, but the dark joy of the moment was fading. What gives, Jack? Going soft? You decided to be his little friend? Fuck you, Jack said, as the distant song came to an end and the DJ decided to talk over the last few notes. Jack hated it when they did that. He hated it more when they talked over the intros right up until the lyrics started. He hadn't taken a step away from his friends by the time the song ended, but he did walk away eventually. Unlike many of his friends, Jack had to borrow a car anytime he wanted to drive somewhere. Dad's work, mostly off the book stuff, was starting to go well for a change. The old man had actually been in a good mood and told Jack, just now 16 in 1986, that he could borrow the car for the night for a field party. It came with a strict warning of retribution should anything happen to the car or if he got mixed up with the cops. Still, this was the most freedom and the greatest moment of his life. Not to mention that he met her. She was with a group of other kids Jack knew peripherally. He was sort of between friend groups at that moment. He had one foot in a few different circles, but didn't really feel close to anyone. He didn't truly belong anywhere. He still had his Mellencamp and Prince albums, but had really started collecting and trading around metal tapes. He didn't like all of it. He didn't even like most of it, but he liked how it made him feel. He liked to imagine himself strong and confident like the people who made the music and the long-haired kids with patches on their jackets who played it in the parking lot before and after school. He had one foot in with that group, but still wasn't in. His dad would never let him grow his hair out. Somehow the crowd had drifted off to other bonfires around the field and other parked cars. The sun wasn't fully down yet. Different music played from different radios and tape decks. Jack had opted for the local rock station, which matched up with a few other surrounding cars. He didn't trust his taste in tapes to impress all these people. As Jack and Diane came on, he started to get up to change it. She took hold of his sleeve, and he could have melted right there. No, I like this one. Jack smiled and nodded at her. She waved a hand between the two of them and said, Jack and Diane, that's funny, isn't it? He smiled wider at Diane. I think so, but didn't want to say anything. I thought so, but didn't want to say anything. I figured people brought that up all the time. She laughed, not as much anymore. He looked around and tried to think of something to say as the song played on. He needed to say something or she would think he was boring. She'd go hang out with some other dude who was better looking or cooler. He needed to be sure what he said wasn't stupid either. His dad always said it was better to let people think you were stupid than to open your mouth and confirm. Jack wasn't willing to let this girl go over that, though. She picked a fuzzy dandelion from between her shoes and blew the seeds off of it. Jack reached down and picked one of his own. He was about to blow it too, but then thought of something else. Do you want to see something cool? She narrowed her eyes and tilted her head. The setting sun caught her hair and her skin in a fiery light that he would remember for the rest of his life. This was the thrill of living. Now he understood the call to hold on to 16 as long as he could. He would die right then if he could have lived in that moment forever. Sure, I guess so. Jack fished through his pocket. He had to lean a little and touched his shoulder to hers in the process. She did not pull away. He took out his lighter and fumbled it a couple times before he got it ignited. Are you ready? I guess so. He lit up the white of the dandelion, and the flame enveloped the fluff. A few sparks popped as they drifted with breeze. Should I say the breeze? As they drifted with the breeze. Okay. One correction, I guess. Diane actually made a little sound of surprise and wonder. He would always think of that sound whenever this song played from now on. They stayed together that whole night, and she let him drive her home instead of the friend she'd come with. He did not kiss her that night and thought he would always regret it, but that came later. The song ended with the dandelion still burning in his grasp. All right, 17 years old, in the last weeks of that cold December of 1987, the song played again over the radio in Jack's room as he watched his father choke to death. The man had gotten sick, but had ignored it until he was bedridden. Jack's mom was away only for a little while. She could be home at any time. Jack was scared as his father lay on his side on the floor beside his parents' bed, more scared than the day his dad lost his job, but he was also excited too. He only felt truly free in a very few moments of his life up to that point. This felt like a moment that might free him forever. Things would be tough without his father's income. It could get really bad, but the man would finally be out of the picture. The threat of him would be silenced, removed. Hearing Jack and Diane play in the background inevitably brought his thoughts back to the field, where he and Diane first met and started dating. He pictured the burning dandelion at sunset as he watched his father's breaths grow more shallow and further apart. His legs started to feel weak. He almost sat on the corner of the mattress, but then decided that was too close. He made it to his mother's makeup table and pulled out the little bench to sit on instead. The song was still going when he thought it might finally be over. His father's eyes were glassy and shot with blood, but then the man took one more ragged suck of air, so Jack waited a little bit longer. He wanted to call Diane. He wanted to be with her more than anything. After his father was gone, she would comfort him, and that would be wonderful. He needed to wait, though. He had to wait until this was over. It would take several more songs before he was sure the old man was completely gone. Jack listened for the engine of his mother's car over the winter winds. He would want to be on the phone and sounding frantic when she came in. Long after the song was over, Jack still practiced his lines in his head. No one ever suspected a thing. All right, let me get a drink of water real quick. Jack took Diane's hands and led her out onto the dimly lit dance floor where they now had to themselves. As the first few notes of the song played, everyone at the wedding laughed and clapped. Jack and Diane Conroy were dancing for the first time as husband and wife to the old classic Jack and Diane. Both of them at 29 years old in 1999 did their best to sway to the music as everyone watched on. Jack guessed that the DJ would probably play 1999, known as Party Like It's 1999 to the uninitiated, by Prince, too, before the night was over. The dance felt awkward, not just with all eyes on him, but trying to move in a tux and wedding dress. More people laughed. Jack told himself that it was all in good fun, but he felt the heat rising in his cheeks and scalp anyway. When he felt that heat, someone usually got hurt. "I love this song," she said. He forced a smile and tried to keep his eyes on her. "I know. It will always be our song for obvious reasons, but I sure do wish they'd picked a different one for us for this dance, Jack." He tilted his head and forgot to move his feet for a couple seconds. "Really? Why? I thought you picked it." She snorted and shook her head. "No, my folks decided to surprise us." Jack sighed and shook his head. "That sounds like them." "This is not an easy song to dance to," she said. Jack laughed and started moving again. "That's fine. Let's just sway back and forth like a couple old white people. We'll be fine." "Do you want to see something cool?" she asked and winked at him. The words took him back to a field at sunset, back when they were 16. It felt like a different lifetime, but that awkward kid would absolutely die if he knew this was where that fateful day would lead. "Sure," he said. "You'll have to wait until tonight, but I'll show you something amazing." He felt a different kind of heat then. He pictured the burning dandelion as the sun died below the horizon. "Are you ready?" she asked. He laughed. "I guess so. Better be." They finished out their dance to a song that may have been the least compatible for a wedding dance. As they turned in place, Jack saw their friends, their surviving family, and then the pocket of old men who used to work with his dad and now worked with the son. Jack wondered, not for the first time, if he was running the risk of becoming like his father, following in the old bastard's footsteps. The money was good, though. This was his wedding day, and the song was finally over, setting them free at last. Wouldn't you know, that song would be the one to come on at the bar across the street from this darkened warehouse on this night of all nights in 2005. The guy knelt between two of Jack's men on the concrete floor, and the asshole had the nerve to beg for his life. The weakness pissed Jack Conroy off. He glanced at the fellow on the left and nodded. The begging, whining guy went from his knees to his face, before he ever realized he'd been hit. He tried to get up as Jack circled around him on the floor. Then Jack planted a boot against the base of the guy's spine, keeping him down. Jack nodded again as the other two started swinging away on the poor dude who had it coming. The impacts were meaty and brought cries from the victim. "Finish him off," Jack shouted over the noise. "I want to be done with all of this before morning." He did his best to block out the song, but it was either that or focusing on the guy's impotent cries for mercy. Jack did his best to imagine himself somewhere else. Of course, he found himself in a field at sunset with from his innocent youth. The next song would be some pop-punk, emo, half-rap nonsense that Jack did not recognize. All right, Jack left her. He left her right there at the gas station and drove on without her. He just couldn't bring himself to listen to any more of her nagging. It reminded him so much of his parents arguing, and he had to get away. Of course, their song was on the radio as he went, like some kind of twisted omen. It was as unwelcome as a noise as a doomed man begging for his life, or a wedding song that was too hard to dance to. Jack didn't turn around right away, but he did go back. By then she had called for and had gotten another ride. She wouldn't answer his calls, but he had a tracker on her phone and went after her. They fought some more that night. They didn't split up right then, but they were separated before 2016 was over. Maybe it was that gas station incident. Maybe it was 100 other ones added together. Either way, Jack thought of her in the setting sun, giving a sound of wonder as he held up the burning dandelion for her to behold. What had happened to those kids? What had happened to him? This was what he struggled with as he drove away without her beside him. Jack sat outside her house just around the curve of the street. There we go. In the shadows between lights. The radio was on and the keys were in the ignition, but he sat in the passenger seat. This was an old trick that still worked pretty well even in 2018. People felt less nervous if you seemed to be waiting on someone else. It was the guy in the driver's seat you had to worry about. The radio was on a commercial and babbling on low in the background. But Jack played their song off of YouTube on his phone and into one AirPod that he had planted in his left ear. He kept the right ear open for trouble, although he was highly distracted by the song on repeat. He watched the light from her windows. He waited for any shadow or motion from those windows. Her car was the only one there tonight, but he still braced himself for two figures to pass one of those windows at any moment. She'd had other boyfriends since leaving him, even though he knew she wasn't seeing anyone right now. He had plenty of girlfriends who did plenty of things that Diane would never, but he felt very little for any of them. He would not park himself outside any of their houses like this. He wanted to go beat on her door. One moment he wanted to beg her to take him back, and he felt sick to his stomach picturing that. The next moment he wanted to force his way inside and make her pay for hurting him. He thought of his father then and felt sick all over. The song ended. After a brief pause, it began again. In his mind, Jack returned to the field where he and Diane would be 16 forever. This time it was her glowing face and fiery hair that enveloped in flames and burned upon the soft breeze. Okay. Jack leaned on the shovel and saw his breath in the partial darkness in the full cold. There was still a lot of work to be done, and he couldn't trust anyone else to help him with this, so it was all on him. He probably should have kept the radio off, but he needed something to distract him, or he was going to go mad. Once their song started playing, he knew this was a mistake. He wasn't walking all the way over there to turn it off, so he did his best to tune it out. That worked about as poorly as he expected, and he returned to shoveling dirt over her body. She wore 2 face masks. Who did that? She wore them down around her throat on little hooks that looped around the back of her neck to keep her ears from being chafed. "You know how to avoid that?" he asked the dead woman in the hole. "Stop wearing the masks. The pandemic was basically over. If you really believed it was even half as bad as the media would have everyone believe." But Jack didn't believe. The fact that she took it so seriously was one more thing among many that pissed him off to no end. Everything pissed him off these days. He had little control over his temper ever since she abandoned him. Even in his line of work, an out-of-control temper was a liability and got in the way of success and promotion. If the guys he worked for, men who knew his father, stone-cold killers in their own right, knew what he'd done tonight, he'd be on his way out. So they couldn't find out. Not ever. Not even if they suspected once she turned up missing. So he kept shoveling dirt, covering her double masks, tucked under her broken chin and over her ruined face. Was the song still playing? How was that possible? It was only 4 minutes long if he remembered right. He thought back to when he first heard it when he was 12 years old, crashing an older kid's party. Was that in 1982? My God, that was 40 years ago. 40 years. It couldn't be, but of course it was. Changes came around real soon, didn't they? And they became women and men instead of 16-year-olds desperate for love and belonging. Where had the years gone? What the hell happened to them? There were 100 reasons for her to leave. This final moment seemed to prove them all, he supposed. But she hadn't left for any of those. She had stuck with him like she was supposed to. Then one day, out of nowhere, as far as Jack saw it, she ditched him. She left him when she was the only one he ever cared about. She left him unanchored, and now they both paid a price. Life went on, at least for him it did, and sure enough the thrill of it had burned away like the fluff of a dandelion, gone and probably forever. The song did finally end, as it always had every time he heard it over all these decades, and Jack returned to filling the hole to cover over his sins.